The territorial dispute between Guyana and Venezuela dates back as far as the 1800s, but in recent years, the discovery of oil has resulted in a conflict that in the past few weeks has escalated into a crisis. Venezuela is seeking to claim sovereignty over the Essequibo region, but Guyana is standing its ground. A mineral-rich territory that accounts for two-thirds of Guyana, the Essequibo lies near big offshore oil deposits. However, before we get into the present-day situation, it's important to note the history. Guyana is largely made up of three former Dutch colonies, Demerara, Berbice, and Essequibo. On the 13th of August 1814, the Dutch formally lost the territory to England by way of a treaty. The Anglo-Dutch Treaty of 1814, however, did not clearly define the boundaries of the territory, particularly areas to the west towards Venezuela, which at the time was controlled by the Spanish. Fast forward a few years to 1831, and that's when the British formally united all three states into the colony of British Guyana and set about outlining the boundaries. The services of German-born naturalist Robert Schomburgk were enlisted in 1840 to survey British Guyana's boundaries. The Schomburgk Line, as it was later called, effectively claimed an additional 30,000 square miles of Guyana. Venezuela disputed the British delineation. It claimed territorial boundaries established at the time of its independence from Spain, which went as far east as the Essequibo River, and effectively encompassed two-thirds of British Guyana's territory. For almost 2 decades, Venezuela repeatedly sought the intervention of the United States of America. The Americans initially refused to intervene until the late 1890s, when then-President Grover Cleveland invoked the Monroe Doctrine to challenge England's claim over the lands. The British, already stretched thin across colonies, and knowing they simply could not afford war over this matter, reluctantly accepted the USA's right to intervene. In 1896, an American-led convention was convened in Paris to finally settle the claims. At the time, Venezuela submitted to the process and vowed to ratify any decision of the convention. On October 3, 1899, the arbitrators awarded almost all of the disputed territory to Britain, much to the surprise of Venezuela. Back then, gold deposits in the mineral-rich area was believed to be the main driving factor behind the dispute. Today, it is oil. The original Schomburgk Line was re-established with minor deviations, which gave Venezuela control over the Orinoco. However, all gold mines went to Britain. Venezuela, having submitted to the process, reluctantly had to accept the award. For all intents and purposes, the matter seemed to be put to rest. That was until 1962, when Venezuela revived its claims. A few short years later, in 1966, Guyana gained independence, thereby making all the disputed lands sovereign territory. In the new paradigm of international law, there was apparently little Venezuela could do. Nevertheless, Venezuela continued with its claims, and their increasing intensity prompted Guyana in 2018 to apply to the International Court of Justice to get a declaration that the 1899 Paris Award was and remains valid and binding. Just 5 years later, in 2023, the dispute has reached crisis level. This follows the discovery of oil, specifically 11 billion barrels worth just off Guyana's coast, which has catapulted the country's economy forward at a time when Venezuela's economy is bordering on collapsing, and President Nicolas Maduro is under immense political pressure with an upcoming election. Some observers believe Venezuela's renewed push for Essequibo is an attempt to unify the country for a patriotic cause, and nothing more than a tactic to galvanize public political support. Nonetheless, a referendum was held on the 3rd of December, asking Venezuelans 5 questions.
Primera pregunta. ¿Está usted de acuerdo en rechazar por todos los medios
First question.
conforme al derecho,
Do you agree to reject by all means, in accordance with the law, the line fraudulently imposed by the Paris Arbitral Award of 1899, which seeks to dispossess us of our Essequibo Guyana? Yes. Second question. Do you support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument for reaching a practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana to the dispute over the territory of Guyana Essequibo? Yes.
tercera pregunta.
Third question. Do you agree with Venezuela's historical position of not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial dispute over Guyana Essequibo? Yes. Fourth question. Do you agree to oppose, by all means, in accordance with the law, Guyana's claim to unilaterally dispose of a sea pending delimitation illegally and in violation of international law? Yes. Question number 5. Do you agree with the creation of a state of Guyana Essequibo and the development of an accelerated plan for the comprehensive care of the current and future population of that territory, including, inter alia, the granting of Venezuelan citizenship and identity cards in accordance with the Geneva Agreement and international law, thereby incorporating that state into the map of Venezuelan territory? Yes.
Sí,
Yes.
sí,
Yes.
sí.
Yes.
This was done even as the International Court of Justice urged Venezuela to refrain from taking any action that could alter the status quo in the region pending its verdict. President Maduro described the vote as a success.
All of Venezuela. All of Venezuela. All of Venezuela. Venezuela all vote yes. Those 10.5 million votes. All of Venezuela. Same world yes. The team is ours, just like our flag. This color is Venezuela. The Essequibo is ours. The Essequibo is ours. It is not a reclamation zone. It is part of my nation. The Essequibo is ours. The Essequibo is ours. Just like our flag, this color is Venezuela. The Essequibo is ours. The Essequibo is ours. It is not a zone of reclamation. It is part of my nation.
El pueblo decidió el domingo y nosotros lo que vamos es pa'lante.
The people exercised their sovereignty and said 5 times yes down the middle street. And what did the people say on Sunday? What did the people say on Sunday?
¡Que viva el mapa completo de Venezuela! ¡Que viva la patria toda! ¡Que viva Venezuela toda!
Long live the entire map of Venezuela. Long live the entire homeland. Long live Venezuela.
There were, however, conflicting reports on the ground of low voter turnout. Guyana's President Mohamed Irfan Ali responded to the development, holding fast to the notion that the border dispute was settled back in 1899. But if anyone is to have the final say, it will be the ICJ.
President Maduro announced several measures which his government intends to take in enforcing the outcome of the referendum held on December 3, 2023. As I made clear from the date the referendum was first announced, this is a direct threat to Guyana's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence, and in violation of fundamental principles of international law enshrined in the UN and OS charters. The measures announced are in blatant disregard of the order given by the International Court of Justice on December 1st, 2023. Guyana views this as an imminent threat to its territorial integrity and will intensify precautionary measures to safeguard its territory. I have tonight spoken to the Secretary General of the United Nations and several leaders, alerting them of these dangerous developments and the desperate actions of President Maduro that fly in the face of international law and constitute a grave threat to international peace and security. We've engaged CARICOM, the OAS, the Commonwealth, and many of our bilateral partners, including the United States of America, Brazil, the United Kingdom, and France. The Guyana Defense Force is on full alert and has engaged its military counterparts, including the U.S. Southern Command. By defying the court, Venezuela has rejected international law, the rule of law generally, fundamental justice and morality, and the preservation of international peace and security. They have literally declared themselves an outlaw nation. Nothing they do, however, will stop Guyana from proceeding with a case in the ICJ, or stop the ICJ from ultimately issuing its final judgment on the merits of the case. We will not allow our territory to be violated, nor the development of our country to be stymied by this desperate threat. Let me be very clear that President Maduro's action is in open defiance of the ICJ order. In my opinion, he is testing the mettle of the ICJ. He has taken a lonely and worrisome road of neglecting his responsibility as a member of the UN family. An adventurous and reckless path that can only bring instability to this region and can only create more uncertain circumstances for the Venezuelan people. We urge President Maduro to rethink these missteps and to act and behave in accordance with international law. All our actions and everything we do from Guyana is aimed at ensuring this region remains a region of peace. We want nothing. Our only ambition is for this region to remain a region of peace, a zone of peace, and for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Guyana to be respected. We ask for nothing more or nothing less.
As it relates to investors, President Ali sought to reassure them.
Your investment is in a safe, democratic, stable country in which the rule of law prevails. You have nothing to worry about when you invest in a country that governs itself in accordance with the rule of law, that stands on the side of democracy, and that understands what true freedom is. So there is nothing to fear. Our international partners and international community are ready to support us. They have assured us of their support. And all we want is for these missteps to be corrected by President Maduro, and for Venezuela and the government of Venezuela to commit itself to peace and to act in a manner that is befitting of a member of the United Nations family.
On Thursday, the two parties are expected to meet in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The announcement of the bilateral meeting came after President Maduro spoke with Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, who also serves as President pro tempore of the Community of Latin America and Caribbean States.
This discussion would relate to matters consequential upon the border controversy which exists between Guyana and Venezuela. I want to give some backdrop and some context. Since the 29th of September, I've been seeking, in my capacity as pro tempore president of the Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean, to have a dialogue between both presidents of two great countries, Venezuela and Guyana. Both countries belong to CELAC. The Caribbean community and leaders within the community have played an important role in assisting to bring this venture together, and in particular the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica, who is the chair of CARICOM. Last evening, CARICOM held a heads of government meeting, and certain matters were crystallized, and I was accorded a particular role in this particular venture.
Subsequently, Prime Minister Gonzalez formally invited both parties to the table via a letter.
The letter reads, "The leaderships of the Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean, CELAC, and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, consider that it is necessary and desirable to facilitate the convening of a meeting in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on Thursday, December the 14th, 2023 at 10 a.m. between the Presidents of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on matters consequential to the border controversy between these two great countries. Both of you have agreed with me for such a meeting to be held under the auspices of CELAC, of which St. Vincent and Grenadines is the pro tempore president, and CARICOM, of which the current chairman is the Commonwealth of Dominica. Both of you have also requested the distinguished presence of the esteemed President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, His Excellency Luis Inácio Lula da Silva. An invitation is accordingly being sent to our dear brother Lula. Given the recent events and circumstances attendant upon the border controversy, the leaderships of CELAC and CARICOM have assessed in the interest of all concerned, including our Caribbean and Latin American civilizations, the urgent need to de-escalate the conflict and institute an appropriate dialogue face-to-face between the presidents of Guyana and Venezuela. Both of you have concurred with this assessment in the quest of peaceful coexistence, the application and respect for international law, and the avoidance of the use or threats of force. Both of you are on public record of committing to the Caribbean as a zone of peace and the maintenance of international law. Experience has taught humanity that it is mature, wise, and preferable for leaders of nations which are in conflict to speak to each other calmly, respectfully, and with patience in order to avoid an escalation into threats or the use of force. To be sure, the resolution of old controversies in challenging contemporary times is never easy. For leaders, it is strenuous, but a strenuous life pursued in peace is to be preferred to one of ignoble ease in perpetual conflict and violent encounter. We are all aware that the government of Guyana is seeking the resolution of the border controversy through the processes of the International Court of Justice, which is currently seized of the matter. We are cognizant, too, that the government of Venezuela has rejected the path of the ICJ as the modality for resolution. The Parliament of Guyana has unanimously instructed the President of Guyana not to discuss the border controversy with the government of Venezuela. The people of Venezuela have advised overwhelmingly in a consultative referendum on December the 3rd, 2023, their government not to accept the jurisdiction of the ICJ in the matter of the border controversy. Clearly, each of you has to summon the proverbial wisdom of Solomon, the patience of Job, and the foresight of all the ancient prophets to engender good neighborliness in peace, justice, security, and prosperity for all concerned. There is thus much for each of you to raise and or discuss on matters consequential to the border controversy, even as you respect the advice or more of your respective peoples and Parliament and National Assembly. Please be advised that each of you is free to suggest requisite modalities of the face-to-face dialogue inclusive of the role of any named interlocutor or interlocutors. Both Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, Chair of CARICOM, and I, as pro tempore President of CELAC, are available to assist in whatever constructive way each of you may suggest or require. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is pleased to host each of you, Prime Minister Skerrit, President Lula, and any other recommended leader or leaders of the region and their respective delegations. Time is of the essence. Let us all resolve to make this historic gathering a successful one. So much is at stake for our Caribbean and Latin American civilizations. All the best to both of you, your respective families, governments, and peoples. Sincerely yours, Ralph, Prime Minister St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now, I can't answer what is going to be the outcome. What I do know with certainty, that it is better for people in conflict to be talking. You can resolve misunderstandings. Enjeux provocateurs can create challenges also. And if you're talking and you're respectful and you're mature and understanding and wise, and you take your populations along with you in that particular process, you are less likely to end up with threats of force or the actual use of force. Not to be talking is very dangerous. And it is something which I believe this matter would weigh in the way in which I'm presenting it to the people of the Caribbean and Latin America. It will weigh very heavily on people's hearts and minds. The war in Ukraine affects us so directly, or profoundly in an indirect way, and therefore direct. Gaza, imagine something on our doorsteps.
Venezuela's government said the meeting on Thursday, and I quote, is in order to preserve our aspiration to maintain Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, end quote. While the office of the President of Guyana confirmed President Ali's attendance, it noted that, and I quote, Guyana's land boundary is not up for discussion, end quote. The outcome of the meeting is significant, not just for Guyana and Venezuela, but the region. Just last week, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay issued a joint declaration calling for both parties to negotiate to seek a peaceful resolution. Brazil has already sent reinforcements to its northern border with Guyana and Venezuela amid the conflict. For South America and even the Caribbean, there's far too much at stake in what has historically been a relatively peaceful region. I'm Krystal Hoyte. Thank you for joining me.